Hey everyone, welcome to another Stripe Dev Chats. My name is Cecil Phillip, and today I'm really excited about our conversation today because we're going to be talking to some folks about building applications with Flutter and how we can plug Stripe into your Flutter applications. And so what I want to do is introduce our guests today, Rémon and Jonas. And, gentlemen, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do? Rémon, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you go first?
Okay, my name is Rémon Helmond. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I am a freelance app developer living in Portugal, and I am one of the creators and maintainers of the Flutter Stripe library.
Nice. And Jonas?
Jonas, my name. I'm from Germany. I'm currently the CTO of two companies, and I'm pretty much responsible for cloud backend and front end development. In the backend, we're using Stripe. In the front end, we're using Flutter. And the combination of those two, I think we're going to talk about later pretty much. But yeah.
Awesome, General. We're really happy for you to be here. And of course, I have to talk about my dear friend, Mike here. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. So Mike is a developer advocate here at Stripe as well, and he knows way more about Flutter than I do. So I'm really glad that he's here to kind of help us with this conversation today.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Cecil. I appreciate you introducing me. I'm at least enough to be dangerous with Flutter, but definitely always happy to be talking to Rémon and Jonas about getting things done with Flutter, because they for sure eclipse me by a country mile on getting things done in Flutter.
That's awesome. Have you ever built anything with Flutter, or like anything
I have a bit.
like simple apps?
Yeah, so in a past life, I worked at Google on the Google Assistant team and on the Android team for a little bit. And so in both of those capacities, I was building Flutter integrations on occasion. But really well and truly, that for me was enough to test out functionality and sort of ship demos and things like that. So I've never actually shipped a production app with Flutter, but it's something I've played with from time to time.
Yeah, I feel like mobile apps for me is always something I've been very curious about, but I've never actually done. Probably because I've never had a job that's required me to do it. But I'm always really interested to kind of see like how that world works and how we plug into that software with some of the other things that we're doing on the back end, for sure. But before we dive into the Flutter conversation, because I know this is going to be a really fun time today, I do want to share some highlights about some of the things that have been happening in the world of Stripe. So what I'm going to do is let's pull my screen up really quick, and then let's kind of go through some of these updates. So first off, if you head over to the Stripe YouTube channel, some of y'all might be looking at us on YouTube right now, or might be watching us on LinkedIn or Twitch or something else. But please head over to our Stripe Developer YouTube channel, and if you haven't yet, make sure you go ahead and subscribe. But just yesterday, we released this new video, accepting payments in your app without any UI design. And this is an interview, little short video that I did with myself and another Stripe called Charlie Crujan, where we kind of walk through how you could just enable payments inside of your React Native applications without doing, again, any UI design, which is really cool. And if you're anything like me, I don't like designing anything. Like, I just want it to work. I leave it up to the designers to make it look pretty and attractive. But this is going to be one of many other videos that we're going to be doing on the topic. So definitely make sure you hit that little notification bell to get notified whenever we release some more of those. Next thing I want to share. So this is, well, look at this. This is from Mike. Who would have thought? Hey, so Mike just released this blog post not too long ago talking about Skycar, which is an open source cloud agnostic shopping cart, which uses Stripe checkout. So Mike, would you want to talk about this super quick? Like what
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this is actually a highlight of an open source project built by Josh Nussbaum, who's one of our open source friends in the world of Stripe. He basically used this as an opportunity to teach himself about Svelte and Svelte Kit. And if you haven't used Svelte before, it is a web application building framework that is very minimalistic and simple and super easy to build with. And so what Josh produced is essentially a Svelte Kit API for building a cloud-enabled cart. So it uses Stripe to manage products and to pass on to the checkout process. And what it gives you on the front end is a Prisma database, or sorry, a Prisma connection to your database and a bunch of APIs to actually go and populate a cart and shopping experience. And interestingly, it is cloud agnostic, which means it can be deployed to lots of different cloud services like Vercel and Netlify and AWS Amplify and Render and things like that. And it's also headless, which means you plug in your own UI. So this is essentially just a series of serverless functions that will talk to whatever you've already built. So it doesn't make any assumptions about how you want it to look or what sort of front end you use. So it can be implemented with PHP. You can tie it into a React application. You can do whatever makes sense for you.
That's really cool. You know, we should do a dev chats about this. This sounds like a really cool project that we should share with folks for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Josh is super awesome and he's super responsive. Actually, on the screen right now is his Twitter handle too, Josh Nuss. So you should go chase him down and follow him there. Like I said, it's an open source project and he would love to have contributors as well. So
Nice.
Drop him a line if you're interested. Feel free to message me. I'm always happy to connect people as well.
Great. And then if folks are wondering where this article is, if you head over to dev.to/Stripe, we have like a little Stripe organization over there where we, you know, a lot of our developer advocates and other folks within the company create really cool blog posts. So again, if you want to take a look at this, make sure you head over to dev.to and and let us know what you think about it. All right, next project I want to highlight too. So this one's called Builderbook. And essentially this was really kind of put together as a way for folks to learn how to do, you know, HTML and CSS and just kind of learn how to build stuff. But like it's a whole open source thing. And one of the reasons that I came up to it is because it is actually one of the #1 starred projects that features Stripe on GitHub. So obviously,
sorry to interrupt, Cecil. Can you zoom in on the web browser a bit there?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great.
Right. So it's actually one of the most one of the #1 starred Stripe project that I found on GitHub. And again, if you take a look at it, I'll zoom in again super quick. So again, you can kind of come in here and it'll teach you, you know, well, one, it's a book, but then two, it also teaches you, you know, how to build applications from scratch, which is really cool. And I think if you're also interested in building out your own books, self-publishing or doing anything of the sort, you know, it has integrations with a lot of, you know, cool projects and whatnot. So definitely make sure you check it out. Oh, look, it's sponsored by Amazon. So, you know, that's not a bad thing at all. But yeah, head over to GitHub and you can check it out. This one's called Builderbook. And last but not least, I want to make sure that we highlight our Stripe Discord channel. I don't think we talk about this a lot, to be honest with you, but you know, there's tons of folks in the community, you know, different programming languages, different clouds, different languages, all talking about things that they're building with Stripe. If you're, you know, ever looking for some support or questions you want to get asked, and you know, maybe you don't want to be on Twitter or Stack Overflow, you can always head over here. We have various channels where people are sharing open source projects or blog posts, or even just having conversations about ideas and things they want to implement, or even just helping each other answer questions. So, you know, make sure if you want to come check it out, there's the link on the screen, and you can go ahead and join our Stripe Discord channel, and you can join the community and, you know, learn about some of the other cool things that folks are doing over there.
Yeah, that's also a good way to stay in touch with upcoming events. You can see actually in the top left of the Discord channel there, we've recently started adding our live events there. So
that's true.
The event we're currently streaming to, you could get
happening now. Look at that.
Discord.
I should check this out. This looks like a fun event. I should go to this and see what's happening there.
Yeah, it might be fun.
It might be fun. Might be a fun time. All right. So I'm going to take my screen off. And again, this is a part of the show where I say this is no longer, you know, about me and Mike. This is about our guests, right? And so, gentlemen, let's talk about Flutter. But particularly since I think this is the first time we've actually had anyone talk about Flutter on the stream before, why don't we start at the beginning? And for me, that is like, why, as a developer, why should I care about Flutter and building, you know, my mobile apps, which, you know, as far as I know, like I can't use C# and I can't use JavaScript. So I'm gonna have to learn a new language. So why should I invest the time into focusing on learning about Flutter?
Yeah, the answer is pretty simple because it's the best framework out there for creating mobile application.
Oh, that's it.
I might be biased.
We're done. That's it. I'm sold.
Yeah, I'm working with it for 5 years already. Before that, I was an Android and iOS native developer. And the advantages of Flutter itself really outweigh pretty much everything that I tested with other platforms like React Native or Electron and whatever is out there. So Flutter itself is a framework, an open source framework developed by Google. It's production ready for about 6 years already. And the idea is pretty much, and where it differs from other frameworks like React Native, for example, is that nothing is native in the sense of Flutter is not reusing things like list views or buttons, etc. So it really does do the whole drawing of the app itself using the Flutter framework. So every pixel is generated by the Flutter framework, and there's no, pretty much no button reuse from the original Android or iOS system. So that's the real big difference. So what you pretty much have on Android and iOS is a canvas, and Flutter takes care of drawing everything on it. So that means you're completely in control of every pixel. You can modify everything, and it is redrawn in a very fast way. Fancy things like hot reload, where you pretty much make a change and you can see it right away, is built in. That's pretty much it. And the language, the coding language itself is called Dart. Dart is very much unused outside of Flutter, but I think it's a very nice language, or it became a very nice language in the last few years. It's very similar to Java. It's a very simple structure, but then again, also by now has several very nice features like null safety, class extensions, and things like that. So when you're coming from a Java world or a Kotlin world, for example, or Swift, it should be really easy to understand for you. That's the basic idea pretty much. I think it's very beginner friendly, and it's also capable for, I'd say, 95% of all the business cases that are out there can very well be achieved by using Flutter.
So, Jonas, can you tell us a little bit about the the unifying dev experience on mobile? So in other words, you mentioned that Flutter sort of redraws the UI for Android and iOS under the covers. Yeah. It doesn't reuse any of the bits that they produce. A very basic scenario where I have maybe a label, a text box, and a button is my whole interface. What does that look like on Android versus iOS? And what is the development experience like? Am I writing that both on an Android side and an iOS side?
Yeah, that's the great thing about it. You can have it three ways pretty much. Like one way is that you want a single UI to be available and to look the same on Android and iOS. I totally forgot. Flutter is also available and stable for macOS, web, and Linux and Windows, which pretty much just is possible because everything is drawn by Flutter itself. But also on the other hand, you might not want to have the very same Android and iOS UI. You might want to do adjustments, like the one should use Material Design, the one other should use Cupertino. I think that's what it's called internally. That's definitely possible, but that also means at the same time you have to write your code more or less twice by checking, am I on an Android device, then show this kind of button, am I on an iOS device, show another one. There are a few things that help you there, but yeah, usually for the most part, you're writing the very same code for Android and iOS. There are things that are that needed or should be really be adjusted for Android and iOS, like the navigation, for example. On iOS, you're used to swipe from left to right in order to go back a screen. On Android, you only use the back button usually, but these things, if you stick to the standard things that Flutter provides, are already built in, and Flutter does it for you. Like the back button is available on Android, but on iOS it looks different. That stuff is pretty much built in, so it's very easy to get started and still have a native feel to it.
Yeah, the framework makes a lot of assumptions about the basics that you would want, but while still making it customizable, which I think is really cool too. You mentioned web as well. So what's the story with Flutter Web?
That's, I wouldn't say new. It's in development for 3 years already. I think it became stable 1 or 2 years ago. What it does is still you have the Flutter framework that's available for web. It uses a canvas kit or an HTML renderer in order to draw. My cat is coming. Watch out. It uses like a canvas kit that pretty much draws all the Flutter widgets on the browser directly inside of a canvas. So that means that all the UI, pretty much everything is available on the web as well without much of an issue. But on the other hand, if you use things that are directly targeting the operating system that you're developing for example, Apple Pay or Google Pay, then this is something that might not work for web because this is not available out of the box pretty much. Same applies to platform views like Google Maps, because that doesn't natively exist in Android or sorry, for web. In Flutter, not for web. Of course, it exists on web, but that is just not available in a native way on Flutter. You can use it definitely, but it's a bit more complicated. And then things are really kind of separating from Android, iOS, native Flutter development to web. But for us, for my two companies that I'm working for, it works really well for web. There are certain disadvantages, but those are like technical, and you don't want to get too deep into this, I think.
Sure. So one of the things I'm curious about, as someone that doesn't really have a Dart Flutter background, how much, well, a couple of questions. Like, how much Dart do I have to know to actually get started with Flutter? Right? Like, do I have to, be a Dart expert, or do I just have to know like the basics, right? Like, loops and functions and classes, and then everything else will just figure itself out.
I think the syntax of Dart itself, and Rémon is going to show you a bit of Dart later on, is very simple. Like, if you already understand like classes and OOP for that matter, then you're very, very much good to go to use Dart as well. There are no special syntax that are hard to understand like on some other languages. So pretty much what you can do is download Flutter from the official website, create a sample project, click on compile on Android, iOS, or Mac, or whatever else you want, and then do your adjustments. So there's not too much magic involved. And I also think that Dart is a very simple language to learn, and also a very simple language to master.
Okay, I think we'll see that in a little bit. I found, coming from JavaScript to Dart, that it was very readable, but also did a lot of things that I wish JavaScript would do, like type safety and null safety and things like that were really, really helpful to have. Sorry, Rémon, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. No, just to add to that, I think also important to mention that the Flutter team did an awesome job in documenting actually the code, because Flutter is open source. So when you download the framework, you can look into, let's say, a button, and then you can click on it and you see really what the class does. And they put a lot of effort in the documentation. So it's quite easy to understand. And also the naming, they put a lot of effort there. And I think both the Dart team and the Flutter team did a good job to enhance the developer experience there.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's one thing we should mention too, is that there's great tutorials available from the Flutter team on all of the above. Learning just Dart and then learning Flutter you can do separately, or if you prefer to kind of do them both at once, the intro to Flutter tutorials are really nice as well.
I know one of the things that's always helpful for me, not only just, obviously the tutorials and learning aspect of it, is, it's always great for me to see like concrete examples. Like, I don't know if you all have any examples of, well, I mean, obviously, Jonas, you do, but like projects and companies other than your own that are using Flutter and building like really cool things that we could actually see what a Flutter app looks like in production.
Oh, yes. I think my previous employer, for example, Phillip, they are one of the first big companies that really started building the app in Flutter. So the whole U app is in Flutter. It's, I think, among one of the biggest one. Of course, other big companies like Alibaba, BMW, also Toyota, and more and more also Spotify, one of their sub companies, Soundtrap, if I'm not wrong, is using Flutter. So I think there are quite a lot of big companies now embracing Flutter, and I think more and more are really trying out things.
One of the things I really like, and I'm on the Flutter website right now. Actually, maybe I should pull up my screen so folks can see what I'm talking about. But if you go to the Flutter website and you head over to their community section, and I'll Control plus this a couple of times, they have this map that's on here that I think is absolutely amazing. There's this map here that shows you the community and how it's spread across all over the world. And so, I don't know how accurate these numbers are, but again, it's just kind of cool to see like the community and how widespread it is of folks that are building applications using Flutter and Dart. And I mean, obviously, like it must be a rich community because there's a lot of people here.
Yeah, the community is pretty much developing as we speak, and also the amount of companies, the amount of developers itself is growing and growing. And yeah, depending on which source you trust, it's apparently more popular than React Native now, but I don't want to get into fights about this.
Yeah, we're not going to start a war. Okay, so we talked about what it is. I'm kind of curious to see, like, what does it take for me to get started building something with Flutter and Stripe? So again, like I've never built a Flutter thing before, so I don't know what IDEs you use or debuggers you use, or what do I have to install? Right, how does that work for me?
You're already on the correct website. So pretty much what you need to do is download the Flutter SDK, which includes the SDK, of course, the APIs behind it on different systems. And once you've installed it, it's pretty much only a single directory that needs to be installed. You're able to develop Flutter apps in your favorite browser. There are plugins available for IntelliJ, Android Studio, everything like that, but also the second most favorite option is Visual Studio, which Rémon is also using. I'm more in the IntelliJ guy. And that's pretty much it, really. So you need to make sure the SDK is installed and that it's in your command or available in your command line. Then you can create the sample project that I mentioned earlier and open that folder within your favorite IDE. And then it should pretty much work out of the box, really.
Nice. So I install it, and then I'm guessing, we move on to the next step, which would be like using an editor. And like you mentioned, a lot of folks use Visual Studio Code, but it looks like you could use Android Studio, IntelliJ, and Emacs. I have never used Emacs in my life, but you know what? If you use Emacs, if folks love Emacs, like I get it, I totally understand. You got to use the tools that are comfortable and make sense for you.
Next devs have entered the chat. They're here to tell us what's up.
Right, there you go. But I think that's great that because Visual Studio Code is a free editor, right? And so is Emacs. I think Android Studio and IntelliJ have community options. So the reason I bring that up is that if I'm a new person and I want to get started building something with Flutter and even Flutter Stripe, I don't necessarily have to spend money up front. I can download the tools. Flutter itself is free and open source, like you mentioned, and so are some of these editors, or most of these editors. And I could just install everything on my machine and we're good to go.
Neat.
Cool.
Yeah, and so one thing I think is interesting to talk about from there too is you're up and running for free. There's no payment to get going, and then depending on where your deploy targets are, you can build a Flutter app and debug it in your web browser with Chrome or Safari or Firefox, whatever your browser of choice is. And then maybe Rémon, Jonas, you can tell us a little bit about so how do I test with Android and iOS? What does that look like?
Yeah, Rémon, gone.
Okay. Now, for example, if you want to test for iOS, you need to have a MacBook. That's a requirement from Apple. You cannot develop for that platform on Windows machines. So that's the first. And of course, you need to download Xcode for iOS, which is the tool chain to develop apps on iOS platforms. And it also has the simulator. So if you don't have, for example, because as an app developer, you always need a lot of hardware, different screen sizes, and of course, that's quite costly if you want to have physical devices. But luckily, they provide nice simulators that you can use, and they are very good. And they come along with Xcode. So if you want to run the app, you can just use a simulator and then just choose the device you want. If you want a big phone or a tablet or whatever, and then all the plugins, the Flutter plugin that you have on your IDE also support the selection of the device, and you just press the play button. And of course, if you did a good job and everything compiles, it will run on your simulator. And for Android, it's basically the same. You download Android Studio. It has also part of the Android SDK. It has emulators there, and you can create the devices you want. Also for older platforms, because Android normally has, you need to go a bit further back with different, you need to support a bit more versions, because Apple is quite more aggressive in updating. So you probably need a bit more variants on Android there as well. But also there you can start for relatively cheap. But of course, important to notice is that at some point before you release, you want to test also performance things. And Flutter doesn't support profiling, of course, on emulators, because that will never be the right experience on the device. So you need at some point really launch it on a physical device.
Yes, one thing I wanted to ask you as well is there's lots of different flavors of devices. Let's say just taking Android, for example, there are many, many devices that are older and newer, but I guess I'm kind of interested in, as you're developing UIs for Android devices, screen sizes and things like that vary quite a bit. Do you have to rewrite your layout, say for a small phone and like a bigger phone and a tablet, or is Flutter responsive in the UI development process?
The first answer is correct. So you would normally need to write the layout code for every size that you want to support for tablet, phone, or desktop even. But Flutter also provides the standard material design elements that can help you with that transitions or with that transition pretty much. So you could scaffold a standard component that means like a button bar that transitions to a site navigation automatically. So those things exist, but usually you will probably end up like writing your own code around, if the screen width is 700, then show this layout or show a different one on another device. Just a fun fact, I'm usually developing on a Mac OS device or on a Mac OS target. That means the Flutter app is like you can just freeform the window, make it small, make it bigger to make sure that it works out without needing to attach like multiple devices or multiple simulators.
Oh, that's a good strategy. That way you get the whole gamut of things. Yeah, cool. So maybe we should talk about the thing that we're sort of here to talk about to begin with, Flutter Stripe. So Flutter Stripe, of course, is our community-run library to integrate Flutter with Stripe to process and take payments. Can you tell us a little bit about integrating with Flutter Stripe and what the process is like there and what you might want to use it for?
Yes, of course. So actually, yeah, this is exactly on the screen you see our repository, and actually what we try to do is a very lightweight integration for Flutter that really steers the native payment components that you also know from if you're familiar with the Stripe Android and iOS SDK. And actually, what we do is we provide a bridge and a Dart interface that you can interact with, and we try to support a lot of different payment methods. Wallets, we support them, everything there as well. Of course, the payment sheet, which is I will show you in a bit. And also a lot of local payment methods like Ideal, P24, FPX, Allbacks, etc.
Yeah, so when it comes to payments on cross-platform apps, I think it's a really interesting use case because web being maybe the most open platform there is, you can take payments for your web app as long as you have it set up. So the local payments thing is really interesting, where Stripe's libraries are pretty good about making your payment methods available and accessible based on sort of your locale. So we have some detection of that in place. It's a little more complicated on mobile apps, right? So on the Android Play Store and on the iOS app storefront, there's some rules that are in place basically to require you to make certain types of app payments processed through Android, or sorry, through Google and through Apple's stores respectively. long story short, the best way to summarize that probably is that if you're making a purchase of a digital good, it has to go through Android or Apple's store if you're on one of their apps. In other words, if you're purchasing a monthly subscription for an app that does something on the phone, then you need to process that through Apple and Google. And if you're doing something that's a service or a physical good, that's when you can use other payment processors. So that's where Flutter Stripe would come in for mobile apps specifically. So literally that's something like making a purchase of on a mobile app for something like I don't know, let's say you're purchasing from a local reseller for furniture or something like that, and they've got a nice app for selling furniture. You could use the mobile SDKs for that, but not for a digital process. It's a little confusing. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's a developing story because there's laws that are being developed in countries that sort of change depending on where you are. And it seems to be an ongoing process too. So there is some information to kind of ingest and understand about that, but I figured it'd be important to call that out because it's something that's not necessarily obvious if you're coming from a web development background that you kind of need to think about for mobile scenarios for purchases. I think I kind of covered it there. Did I miss anything that maybe we should call out there? I think that's probably pretty good.
Now, of course, if you want to use like wallets, for example, you also need to take into account that Apple then also says you are forced to use Apple Pay. Also, if you want to use Apple Pay, you need to do some things on the Apple developer portal, create some certificate and some IDs. And yeah, for Google, it's also the same. You need to start some Google Pay, some trajectory there as well. So that's also important to notice. And those are the only parts that are done outside the Stripe SDK. Most of the things are really handled by Stripe, but I think those things are important to be aware of when you are integrating Apple Pay and Google Pay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I also don't think that we said that because, of course, you're compiling a native application on Android and iOS, it gets deployed through the App Store, the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. And so to do that, you also need to register with Apple and Google to do those things. And there's different processes for each, but I think the registration for Apple is $99 a year. And I think for Google, it's $25, something like that. So those are parts of the process when you get to the deployment stage, which is something to consider as well. Yeah, so I think that kind of covers the introduction to what's going on with Flutter Stripe and how that all works. At this point, maybe we can go into a bit of a demo. I think, Rémon, you have something ready to share. Is that right?
Yes, I have. It's okay. I will try to share my screen then.
Sure. Yeah, and while Rémon is getting set up, for those who are hanging out with us live, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll try and pause to answer them as it makes sense, and we'll save some room at the end of the hour here for taking questions as well.
All right, cool. So Rémon, your screen is on, and so it looks like we're looking at a YAML file.
Yes, exactly. No, it's always scary to share the screen if everything is visible, but good to hear that it is. And yes, exactly. So I already created a demo app. So I will quickly show that. It's a very simple app that pretends you added something to the cart and you can press checkout. And the aim is to just pay something either to using the cart and Ideal. And how to do that, I will talk through it step by step. So first, of course, you need to go to the pubspec YAML file and add the Flutter Stripe dependency. And pubspec YAML is where you declare the structure of your package and also the external dependencies that you want to use in your application. And it's actually quite simple. You need to add the name and then the version if you want to constrain the version. If you don't put a version, it will grab the latest one. And then what you normally will run in your terminal is Flutter pub-get. Just for the speed of this demo, I don't want to do that because sometimes it needs to get some extra dependencies, but it will fetch it and then you're good to go. And then the first thing what you need to do is initialize the Stripe SDK. And what you need to do for Stripe, and probably if you already integrated Stripe in other client libraries, you need to set up the publishable key, which is needed to send client payment data to Stripe itself. and that's just simple. It's a string, so you just set the parameter, and then you set the publishable key. And also what I already did is set a URL scheme, and a URL scheme can be needed for certain payments when you go outside your app. For example, people that know Ideal or P24, when you use those payment methods, you go to an external site that is either the bank itself or some other payment provider that will handle the payment itself. And then after you completed that, Stripe will execute a return URL that you can capture in the app. So then you can also know, okay, now the customer is done and I can continue with my flow. And last but not least, because this is just setting the settings, when you think, okay, this is good, you say, okay, to Stripe, apply these settings. And let's go also to the checkout screen, because that will be the next thing, because now we only set the settings. And I will go to, because I created, just to show you a bit of how Flutter looks like, it's a declarative UI. And what I just have is some scaffold, which is, let's say, simple, this is my screen. And then you have some app bar. I created some paddings and some drop-down menu, not something very complex. And then a button that says pay. And here's actually the interesting part, because when we tap it, we go to a method called pay. And the first thing what we need to do, of course, is get a so-called client secret. And as you also can see, I have here a backend running, because that's also mandatory for security reasons. You don't want your client to directly communicate with Stripe and create payment intents, because that can be manipulated on the phone. So what you normally do is you will communicate with your backend and say, hey, I'm ready to pay, and these are my order card contents, and it has this price. And then the backend will communicate with the Stripe API and says, okay, create the payment intent. And what the backend will do is return back to you the secret, and that's what you need to send it to collect the client data. And I will quickly show you also how I did it. And this is, you can do it much nicer, because also Dart and Flutter has a lot of nice serialization libraries, like, for example, Chopper, or you have also JSON serializable. But just for people that are not very familiar with Dart, I use as plain as Dart as possible. So I only created an HTTP post with some JSON content, and I just say to my backend, okay, I have euros, this is the price in cents, and these are the payment methods that I use. And then I will send that out, and I will retrieve the client secret and return that back to my app so I can collect it. So when we have that and everything is good, we can initialize the payment sheet. And we briefly mentioned that as well. And if you really want to start with integrating Stripe on the mobile, I always recommend go for the payment sheet, because it saves a lot of hassle, because Stripe already does a lot for you. For example, localization, error handling. It provides also, if you use, for example, Ideal, it already shows the nice Ideal form. For card field, it provides already camera access, so you can scan the card on iOS. It provides, if you select a certain country, that also the mandatory zip code is visible there. So those are things, as an app developer, I really don't want to think about a lot, because it's easy to forget, and it's great that Stripe already has that built in. So first of all, in order to do that in Flutter, you need to initialize it, and I will show you how to do it. First, I create some billing details that you normally collect when you have a checkout screen from the customer. And important to mention is, when you do this in Flutter Stripe, it just sets the billing details default. So it won't set the billing details. If you know Stripe, it doesn't set it on the payment intent yet, because when collecting the data, the user can, for example, change the country to US or whatever, if things are incorrect. So that's an important thing to notice. We also provide a return URL. That's the callback URL that is also set to the app, and obviously the client secret. And after you set things up, we can display the payment sheet to the user. And that's just because we already configured it. We just say to the Stripe library, okay, just present it. And what it will do is it will, at the end, return a future when the user completes its details. So what you can do is just await it. And then when payment is completed, you can either say, okay, I will show success in my UI, or if something happens because the bank is down or some technical things, you can display some error. And we make a distinction between there can be an error in Flutter, which you don't want to show to the user, but also the Stripe SDK can sometimes show a localized message. For example, the bank rejected the payment or something, contact your bank or whatever. And that's maybe something you would want to consider to show to your users. And okay, let's now also see how that looks like. So when I am in my card, I selected now also the card payment. I will press pay. I will use a test card from Stripe, so you cannot go to Amazon now and pay everything on my expense. So that
I was looking forward to that.
Unfortunately. Yeah. I thought so. And as you can see here as well, the country is already pre-filled, which is nice. You also see for the user that it's a Visa card. So I really like these small things from the payment sheet. And also important, I use a test publishable key, so you can see this is in test mode. So it won't actually charge a card or anything. So, and if I pay, it will complete and we capture it. And last thing that I would like to show is also the ideal, just to show you also the flexibility of the payment sheet. Because if I create payment intent with ideal, which is a Dutch payment method, you see a totally different screen where you can fill in your name, select the bank. And this is what I meant. It goes now to an outside environment. And because I'm using a test key, Stripe creates some nice test pages that will either, where you can say okay, this is successful or fails. And you can test actually the integration with those external websites as well. So let's authorize it for now. It's processing and it's also done.
Nice.
Yeah. That is what I wanted to show you.
As you were showing the code, I was just thinking, and you all did mention this earlier, I could read everything that's happening here. So the code doesn't look familiar. It looks, I completely understand everything that's happening, and particularly too as you ran through the demo. And I also thought the integration and seeing how the payment sheet pops up and the UI looked very well integrated into the look and feel of the application you're building. So it didn't look like, oh, okay, I have an app, and then here's this other third-party thing that looks like it's a third-party thing. It doesn't belong to my application. It just kind of pops in here, and is it's on my screen. So
yeah, that was nice and tidy.
Yeah, it is definitely nice and tidy. And so, like you mentioned, the payment sheet is one option we have to show things on the screen. Are there other options for other scenarios that for accepting money other than using a payment sheet that's supported using the SDK?
Yeah, yes, of course. We support, for example, also Allbacks, which is from Australia, and payment, and they have their own
form.
The same also, we have a card field. If you really want to embed it more in your current UI, we have also a so-called card field that you can use. Of course, we have native buttons for Google Pay and Apple Pay, because there are strict regulations when it comes to showing Apple Pay and Google Pay marketing material. And actually, Stripe already takes care of these things, and so it's quite easy to be compliant in your app as well. Also, the direct debit in the US. I think that's quite new that Stripe introduced. That has also its own flow and form.
Yeah, that actually answers one of the questions that we got in the chat here while we were talking. Looks like the question is in Portuguese. So, Rémon, I don't know how fluent you are in Portuguese. We might send you that way. But the question roughly was, is it possible to use your own fields to make the payment form? I'd imagine for a credit card or bank transfer, things like that, rather than using the payment sheet.
It is possible, yeah, to design your completely own customized card form field with everything in it. But there is an issue that we are losing the PCI compliancy once we do that, because the card field or the card form field that Stripe or the plugin already integrates is fully PCI compliant because it never exchanges the credentials like credit card number, etc., within the platform. It never leaves Android and the iOS SDK that is native from Stripe. But once we don't want to do that and do our own customization, you need to send those information. It is captured by Flutter itself in every way you want, but you're gonna lose the PCI compliance. That's the main issue. If you want to go that route, it's possible, but we do not recommend it. We recommend, first off, the payment sheet that we showed you, because that's the easiest way to get started without doing any kind of UI. Secondly, a card form or card form field. And if you really don't want to do that, you can do your custom UI with the named disadvantage.
Will you retain PCI compliance if you use the card form or the card form field?
No,
Okay.
because it pretty much the credentials that are important never leaves. You cannot access it with the Flutter Stripe SDK or within Flutter itself, because it never leaves the actual Stripe SDK and Stripe Android and iOS SDK. So that's the big difference there, and why you're good to go if you rely on the native or the features that we already offer.
Got it. So the strong recommendation is to stick with the payment sheet then, unless you want to get into a bunch of other dev work.
Yeah, and that's quite important. Like we mentioned quite a few features like Allbacks and things like that, or Google Pay and Apple Pay. And all of these have examples within the repository. So each screen, each use case pretty much has an example that you can copy and paste in your own application and then go on with that.
Yeah, definitely.
We also spent a lot of time in creating documentation to get started. Hopefully also you received the link in the docs page there. So if people really want to know like step by step how to get started, even with links to official Stripe docs, really check out our repo indeed. And they have good links to get started with payment sheet or Apple Pay. And we are working on making it better and enrich it.
Yeah, so one other question that came up while you were doing your demo on the iOS emulator, when you were showing the interface there, there's a button that says scan card, and Dev Keto asks, what does scan card do? Just curious.
Yeah, it will do what it actually says. So it will start the camera on iOS. So also important to notice is that you need to set the permission, give permission in declare it that you will use the camera in there. And then what you can do is you can put the card in front of the camera, and it will read the card contents in there. And that's sometimes the same if you want to use like some payments, you can also sometimes read it. So in other applications, so it works a bit the same.
Yeah, that's
it's
one thing.
Only available on iOS.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's available only on iOS, and I think the wording is a little funny there because I think scan card sometimes kind of evokes like the card reader where you might swipe the card, but this is literally using your camera to point it at your credit card and pull down the numbers that way.
So on that note, I did have a quick question since you brought that up. So I know, so we can scan the card. Do you know if the Flutter SDK supports Link? So Link is that feature that it stores your card information. So the next time I come in, I don't have to put it again. I could just select it and it'll just pre-populate it for me. Does it support that?
Like auto form pretty much Yeah, I guess that's where you're going into. I think I'm not entirely sure about the payment sheet itself, if that's supported or not. But the card form and card field definitely do. But on the other hand, it's in this case really unrelated to Flutter because those are native views. That
Components.
means
Yeah.
those are drawn by Stripe Android on Stripe iOS. That means they are also responsible for that kind of support. And as far as I know, yeah, the auto-filling form things on iOS and Android are supported indeed.
So then I think
But,
that brings up a good point,
yeah.
right? And the point is, as updates happen to the Stripe SDK, like you yourself really don't have to do much, right? Like I'm guessing it's like a switch or an option you turn on, but you kind of just get these features, right? So like I don't have to update the form or change anything, or I don't have to think about like the localization of the form itself, because a lot of that happens with Stripe. It's more so on the developer side to just enable or disable those features as they need to, right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. So actually, we use the same setup as the React Native SDK. So what it does is actually the React Native creates a kind of bridging class for React Native, and actually we use the iOS and Android native binders that they use, and we create our own Dart layer. So if something is added, for us, it's like on the native layer, it's normally a bit copy and paste, and we do a very tiny bit to make sure that we can communicate it back to Flutter. But that's actually basically it. And then on the Dart layer, we just create the interface so the users can communicate with the Stripe SDK, and that's actually it. So it's, yeah, we try to make it as thin as possible from our side and use the Stripe SDK.
But your point, pretty much all you need to do is update the Flutter Stripe plugin. We update it, of course, on a regular basis to get the latest things inside. And if you're, for example, using the payment sheet, again, that's what we recommend. You always have the latest features and like helpers that can improve the behavior for you.
I think what's interesting about that is you all, support this open source SDK that's also built on and dependent on Stripe's SDKs. So like, what does that look like in terms of like release cycles and cadences? Like, how does that affect how you release software? Because, if we release a security patch, does that mean that, you have to scramble and cut a release really quickly to like address that security patch? Or do you have like some regularly scheduled, release cycle or cadence that you use to kind of like, put your updates out?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's also quite a technical answer because, again, Rémon said we rely on React Native, the plugin that's official from Stripe for React Native. So that means whenever Stripe React Native plugin releases a new version, we get a notification, of course, and then we make sure that we also update our part within a few days or maybe a week to make sure that all the latest features are included. And of course, security issue related things should also then be covered by that. The release process is quite simple for the most part. It's really copy and paste of Android and iOS related things from React Native repository. But if we actually need to adjust the Dart bindings because they're like a new constructor or new fields added, then it might take a bit longer. But yeah, that's about it. But yeah, we pretty much at this point really rely on Stripe React Native to do the updates, and we follow shortly after.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a lot of really good work that you end up doing to maintain this library, and we probably should have started this call by pointing out how much hard work has gone into this. And honestly, thank you both for doing the work to keep Flutter Stripe up and running in the way that it does. It's been really interesting to see the community kind of pick it up and to see Stripe being integrated into Flutter apps as well. Well, I guess, so we have a couple minutes left. We're kind of getting to the top of the hour. If folks are watching and you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. One thing I'm curious to hear maybe from each of you in turn, and I guess I'll start with Jonas. So what are things that are coming for Flutter that you're interested in or excited about in the future?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, there are some technical things like records, for example, that other languages already have. But so far, for me, the most important thing as a developer who's running several apps already in the Play Store, App Store, or web is stability and speed. I don't really care about new features that much because I want my app to continue working as expected. And only if I'm having too much time, then I'm focusing on maybe a new few features that might help. But that's really it. I would really be glad if the Flutter web continues to have focus. Because, for example, when you open a Flutter web app, you need to download 8 or 10 megabytes of data because you have to download the whole engine, and only then the screen pops up. There's no SEO support or anything. That would be nice if to have it at some point, but so far I'm quite glad. So maybe Rémon has something else to offer that he's looking forward.
There are always things. I'm normally very happy with the overall experience, but yeah, I agree part with you, Jonas, as well. Like making it also, especially on the new platforms like web and desktop, make it more mature. But also for iOS, I'm looking forward for app clips because now, yeah, the Flutter engine is relatively big in size, so you cannot use a Flutter app clip. I think they're starting to get closer by be able to enable that. So that's, I think, something that would be very cool to have. Also on the Dart programming language, they start now working on a feature called meta programming, which sounds very interesting to see how that develops. So you can do a bit more scary stuff and interesting stuff as well. So let's see how that will look. And yeah, no, I think it looks very good. They're working very hard every day on new features. So it's very hard to keep track of everything, to be honest. I do my best, but
Sure. I think it's funny that developers always get excited about the things that sound the most dangerous. Like meta programming sounds like you could melt a phone down if you did the wrong things, you know? Yeah. So thanks so much for being here, of course, and for hopping on the live stream with us today. For those of you who are watching either live or later on, both Jonas and Rémon's Twitter handles are on the screen here, so make sure you track them down and follow them there. Of course, Cecil and myself are also available on Twitter. We try to be as responsive as possible. Yeah, I think that might do it for the day today. Cecil, was there anything else you wanted to do before we wrap?
No, I mean, I think that was about it. Again, definitely thanks for the both of you to come on and show this project to us and share those demos. And for folks that are watching, definitely make sure you check out the links that we shared to, Flutter Stripe. And, obviously you can head over to the GitHub repo and you can look at their samples and their docs and they're getting started. And I'm sure, if you have any feedback, you can create issues or even send them a pull request. I mean, it is Hacktober, right? So, I mean, this is what we do in Hacktober. We send folks pull requests to, help support the projects and, help these folks that are doing a lot of hard work to create this SDK for us. So again, thank you too, again, very much for coming on, and thank all of you for watching. And I guess that's it. Yeah, I guess that's it. So this has been another Stripe Dev Chats. We'll see you all next week. We'll be having more folks from the Stripe community talking about some of the amazing projects that they're working on. And if you have any suggestions, again, feel free to tweet us or send us a message on YouTube or LinkedIn or any of the million places that you might be watching us on right now. But thank you again, and we'll see you again. Bye, folks.
Take care.
Thank you.